Welcome to the Expert Witness Podcast. I'm your host, David Smith, and I'm excited to be here today with Eric Rose. Eric has over 40 years experience developing new products in the consumer, medical, and industrial product markets. He's worked with companies such as Mattel Toys, American Hospital Supply, Brown Jordan Furniture, and Sunrise Medical. Products he's worked on include Disney infant preschool toys, disposable medical devices, dental devices, durable medical equipment, patio furniture, consumer electronics, and personal protective equipment, such as earplugs and N95 masks. Eric's education includes a Bachelor's of Science in Industrial Design, also known as Product Design, and an MBA. Eric was certified as a New Product Development Professional, NPDP, in 2008. He is a member of the American Society for Quality and sits on the board of directors of the Society of Plastics Engineers Product Design and Development Division. Eric has taught product innovation and related subjects at the university level since 2009 at schools such as Pepperdine University, Loyola Marymount, and Rice University. He has been a public speaker since 1985 on a wide range of topics from plastic product design and manufacturing to product liability. Eric began his expert witness journey in the spring of 2020 when he was tapped to be a product design expert witness in the 3M military earplug case, where he was deposed by 3M for 7 hours. He currently serves as an expert witness working with both plaintiff and defense counsels on commercial dispute, patent infringement, and product liability cases. Eric, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you today, David.
All right, so one of the first questions I always like to ask is, how did you get into expert witness work? It seems to be a little known career choice. It's not something that people usually talk about when they're kids. So I'm always curious, how were you introduced to it and how that process happened?
Sure. I'll start with a slight digression. When I did my undergraduate degree at Arizona State in product design, I had a course in product law, and I was fascinated by the course. It was half product liability and half intellectual property law, patent law primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always had a heightened awareness of how product and law could intersect. Fast forward to the spring of 2020, and I was reached out by a law firm in New York who said they had this 3M military earplug case and thought that I might be a good expert witness. Well, it turns out that from 2007 through 2011, I was the research and development director for Moldex Metrics, also known as Moldex. And they make earplugs and N95 masks. And because I had that expertise, I figured, well, that makes sense for me to be able to participate, again, in this intersection of law and product. And I was pleased to be on that project, that 3M earplug project, for about a year.
All right. That's great. That's really interesting. And we actually wanted to talk more about that 3M earplug case today. Now, I understand that in that case, 3M's earplugs were found defective, resulting in a $6 billion settlement.
Yes.
If I understand, that's the largest multi-district litigation to date,
Yes,
with over
in the US history.
250,000 plaintiffs. That's really interesting. So, can you tell us real briefly, what is a multi-district litigation?
Sure. I'm not an expert in that topic, but unlike a class action where individuals are consolidated into a single lawsuit, multi-district litigation, also known as MDL, involves the court grouping together similar cases and adjudicating them in a through a single court. So in this case, it was the Southern District of Florida, where this one judge was the court to manage these 250,000 cases, and I was involved with that.
Okay. And so as an expert, did you work on multiple suits within this multi-district litigation, or how does that work?
Yes, so the New York law firm retained me, and they had a few clients. I don't remember exactly how many how many plaintiffs they were representing, but it was what was called a bellwether. So the intent was to have a few bellwether cases that would address various issues in the case to see how they did and use that to test for the rest of the cases. And so this was a very early case that I worked on, and primarily for one small set of plaintiffs. That was followed by a second grouping out of the attorneys were out of Kansas, and that was another case that had, I think they had two plaintiffs that they represented.
Okay. And so do you know, were there a bunch of other plaintiffs experts that were doing kind of the same thing as you?
I
Or,
don't I don't know. I've never heard of any other product design expert witness addressing what I did. That is the product design, development, manufacturing, quality from a product design perspective. I don't know of any other such experts, but they may be out there.
okay. Oh, that's interesting. So I'm curious, how were you initially contacted about this case? You said it ended up being almost a year's worth of work. Was it just a cold call one day where you happened to be in the office, or how did those attorneys find you?
You know, I can't recall. It's been so long, and back then I wasn't really tracking any of this. My
Mhm.
recollection, it might have been through LinkedIn. You know, I have a presence on LinkedIn. I certainly have a presence through my website. I have a presence through my academic work. And again, with my experience at Moldex, being the research and development director of personal protective equipment, I suspect there's probably only a handful of people in this country that could opine on the product design development of an earplug that also have enough speaking experience, public speaking experience, including my academic work teaching at the university level, to be that mix of, as you know, what it takes to be a good expert.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly additional skills in excess of just understanding the engineering principles that are required to be a good expert.
I like to
Um,
say making the technical understandable.
that is a topic that keeps coming up in these, and it's so true. Um, just being able to, dumb it down or de-jargon it or just make it understandable for anybody is so important in these cases.
Absolutely.
Um, it's it's always interesting to me with this type of work, though, how you can have the how the amount of work you have ahead of you can change in a day or two. There have been times in our business where we've had, a fairly light forecast, and then within a week we get 3 or 4 new cases, and all of a sudden everybody is, slammed with work. Uh, you know, and some of these cases, like you said, last a year or two or 3 or 4 even, and so uh, it's interesting that way. It makes planning difficult sometimes, but uh,
Yes.
it's a fun place to be.
Keeps you on your toes.
For sure. All right, so going back to this 3M earplug case, it sounds like you opined that the earplugs were defective because they didn't penetrate far enough into the ear to form an effective seal. Is that correct?
Yes, essentially that is correct. And this is public information out on the internet. A number of law firms have published pages, like a white page almost, on what happened and so forth. So
Mhm.
it's not anything confidential. So there's this idea, some people talk about this, the butterfly effect, where one little thing can have huge downstream effects. And essentially, it was my opinion that's what happened in this case, that the 3M company had a design that they were developing on spec for the government. There was no contract between the government and 3M to say that the government wanted a particular design, but 3M was developing it and the government was providing some commentary. One of the bits of commentary the government provided was that they wanted this earplug, this dual-ended earplug, which is pretty long for an earplug, to fit in one of their earplug cases they already had. In order to do that, last minute, 3M made a change, and that change was to shorten the distance between the two ends of the earplug, and the two ends of the earplug were originally about 3/32 or so greater. But by shortening that one side of the earplug, now that side of the earplug could interfere with the surface of the ear. And the surface of the ear then would push the earplug back out and in what was called imperceptible loosening. And if you know anything about acoustics, if you break an acoustic seal, then that sound, noise, gunshot, mortar fire, whatever it might be, that reverberation can end up in your ear, causing injury. And essentially that is what happened.
Huh. That's really interesting. So, talk to me a little bit about the work that you did to be able to generate and support your opinions.
Sure, there was a big team on this case. There were numerous experts, audiologists, academics who were experts in this space, people who built an artificial ear for testing, simulating jaw movement, all these kinds of experts that were on the case. Very interesting. I had to review their work. I think printed out, it was about almost 4 feet worth of binders on my desk. My desk wasn't even big enough. So thousands of bits of information. And ultimately, I had to consolidate all of that plus my 35 plus years experience in plastic and rubber part design, going back to my undergraduate courses in human factors, plastic part design, tooling, all of that came into play where I was able to then opine on the weaknesses of the design, the development, including ISO 9000 issues, and testing and supporting documentation that any responsible manufacturer would do.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about 4 feet of binders worth of information that, goes into how a product is designed or could be designed or things that they could have or should have looked at. And I think in product development in general, people think it's a quick and easy process. And they don't realize how much research, how much development, how many different things have to be looked at in order to put a product like that on the market.
Well, we often talk about foreseeable misuse. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at what I call, we call a failure mode and effect analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding what is the real world environment that this product is going to be used in. If you're a military person in Iraq in the middle of the summer, running, jumping, crawling, these are all important attributes for an earplug, for example, but any piece of, any product you develop needs to have that
Mm-hmm.
kind of analysis done to ensure the product in the end is safe and effective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's one of the things that we help companies with. I don't know if you've noticed this, but we've found that a lot of companies, a lot of engineers, they'll put their heart and soul into designing this cool product, And it's so difficult for them to turn around and say, okay, now what's wrong with it? How is it going to fail? What are people going to do with this that I'm not expecting? And so it can often be very helpful to involve a third party in that risk assessment or failure modes and effects analysis, just because
Absolutely. I
it's
read the quality manual, the quality book from Duran, and that's exactly what he talks about. A failure mode effect analysis is really, and same thing with design reviews, are most effective when third party, those that not involved with the design, are involved in the critique to
Mhm.
ensure a beginner's mind in some regards, or experts in other areas such as manufacturing, um,
Mhm.
or the user, the human factors. They're looked at with that outside eye.
Yeah, absolutely. So after you had generated these opinions for the case, how did you present your findings? What did you do to make it easy to understand and easy to digest for anybody that was listening?
Sure. So there's really two parts of that answer. First, for the report, the expert report, I had numerous illustrations, cross sections of the earplug, notes, details, dimensions before the change, after the change, implications of that, marked up drawings, highlighted excerpts from independent sources such as human factors textbooks. US military training book was included as reference, non-military US government standards. You and I had talked about the EPA being one of the regulatory bodies involved with rating earplug noise reduction ratio. Um, Plastic part design standards, again, going back to my undergraduate degree. ISO 9001 was a big one, design control, design review standards, and much more, trying to keep things simple when it came to the report. On the deposition side, it's really about drawing analogies, simple analogies, whether it's about building and testing a car, making sure that you're testing the car with the right tires and wheels that are on the product in the final car, not testing individual bits and pieces and then trying to draw conclusions that when assembled, it works this and such. Same thing with the analogy I use sometimes about building a house. When you design a house, you want design specs: 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 2 floors, swimming pool in the back. Well, it's important that when the house is all done and you inspect it, it's not 1 bedroom, 1 bath with a swimming pool in the front yard. So being able to use simple analogies as to what did or did not happen, I found was very productive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Those relatable metaphors uh, not only help them understand it, but also helps it stick in their mind as well. So it's not just, some drawing that they saw, but now they can really understand and remember why that drawing was important.
Something relatable, yes, absolutely.
Mhm. Right. So I understand you were also the subject of a Daubert challenge in this case. Is that correct?
Yes, so the court has the responsibility to ensure that the expert is an expert. And you and I think, in the past have talked about some of the new rules about the Daubert, uh, and making sure that this methodology is sound. So I was able to use 3M's documents, ISO 9001 documents, independent textbooks, and other credible peer-reviewed, supporting documents, and use that as my methodology, so that it wasn't Eric Rose's opinion. It
Mhm.
was Eric Rose as a voice to these credible, independent sources of fact that had become acceptable in the industry, such as ISO 9001 or 3M's quality management system, whatever they were. And because I did that, in the end, the court stated, I'll just quote a couple things here, the defendants do not challenge Rose's qualifications or his opinions that Arrow, a division of 3M, violated industry and internal corporate standards. Rather, they seek to exclude his unsupported leap to the conclusion their alleged violations increase the risk of product defect. So in the end, the last thing the court said was Rose's analytical steps are clearly articulated and substantiated by a verifiable, factual basis which meets the precision and specificity requirements of Rule 702 and Daubert.
Yeah, that's sounds like the best outcome you could get from a Daubert challenge.
I would say that was pretty darn good. But it was, again, it was based on careful application of this methodology that was not Eric Rose's opinion. It was Eric Rose as a voice to these fundamental facts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that we teach all of our experts is if the basis of your opinion is that's just the way it is because I know or because I say so, that's not going to work. You've got to go back to some testing, you've got to go back to a textbook, you've got to go back to a standard, and then all you're doing is explaining and presenting what's already been documented and is well known. So it's
supporting the trier of fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Just presenting the information that they need to make the right decision. So talking a little bit more about the Daubert challenges and trying to get experts excluded, it seems that at least in high value cases, that's a very common strategy for one or both sides to take, is to try and get the other expert excluded. And oftentimes you're asked as an expert, have you ever been the subject of a Daubert challenge? Which I would imagine a lot of experts have. If you haven't, you probably haven't done a lot of this work. But that's very different than being excluded as a result of a Daubert challenge. And so I think that's an important clarification to make for a lot of people, that just being challenged is not a bad thing. In this case where you were challenged, it sounds like it was actually a good thing, and the court said, hey, he's an expert and we like the way he presented his information. And it seems very clear and it seems like it's done right. It's almost like their challenge backfired, and instead of making you seem less credible, the court buoyed you up and said, wow, he really is credible. You should listen to what he says.
Yes, I think that's a fair statement. I was actually surprised that 3M did not challenge my qualifications. Maybe there was something they could find that they felt I didn't have 20 years experience of earplug design or something to that effect. But no, they didn't. And that was great. Nor did they challenge my opinions that they had violated industry and their own internal corporate standards, because that was not, it was hard for them to refute that. I was surprised but pleased that I wasn't really challenged there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you had mentioned that this was your first case as an expert witness. Is that right?
Yes.
What was that? I mean, now that you've done this a little bit more, what was it like working on such a big and what has become a very high profile case as your very first experience?
Getting thrown into the deep end of the pool with inadequate swim training and maybe a couple floaties on my arm. That's about it. Fortunately, I've been in my own consulting business now. It's about a dozen years. And after 35 plus years experience working at the corporate level, including being in the boardroom at Mattel Toys and having to pitch new products and strategies, I've had some trial by fire, and certainly this was an incredible inaugural voyage into my expert witness world. But I feel like I came out the other end okay. Was retained by the second firm in the same case and same MDL. And since then, I've worked on another maybe 10 or so cases and enjoy the work. It's a wide variety now for me of product liability. I'm currently working on a commercial dispute case in the PPE industry, N95 mask case, and also did a patent infringement litigation case. So I love those three types of cases, and I believe the 3M earplug case really set the stage for me to be able to do this work, and it's growing quite quickly for me, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, that's great. Um, so I'm curious if there's anything that you learned from the attorneys or from the process uh, being involved in such a large and public case, things that you might think every expert should know.
So there's a couple things. I think, first of all, these cases take longer than you ever imagine.
That's the truth.
Yes, I'm not sure what uh, alternative universe these cases run in, but in new product development, it's always about decreasing time to market to get a new product out. But in the legal world, there's court schedules, attorney schedules, and the other thing that I learned besides that things take longer is that schedules are out of your control for the most part. Primarily, they're driven by the court. Secondarily, there's attorney issues. They're juggling cases. And then downstream, there's the expert. So one day the attorney will call up and say, sorry, we have to change our review session from X
Mhm.
date to Y date. And there really isn't much of an option. So you're juggling to move other appointments around accordingly. And I'm learning to get used to that.
Yeah, it is a little bit different than normal product development work. You could have a case that sits dormant for 3, 4, 5 months, maybe even a year, and then all of a sudden you get a phone call and they need something in a week. That's not terribly uncommon, unfortunately, but that's the way this industry works, I guess.
Yes.
Um, so aside from earplugs, what other types of cases do you typically work on? I know you talked about patent cases and commercial disputes, but what sorts of products or devices do you like to work with?
So for most of my career, I've worked in the consumer product. I mentioned Mattel toys. I worked in the furniture industry. Um, I like medical products. I started my career in the disposable medical device industry with American Hospital Supply. I moved into durable medical equipment, was working for the world's largest manufacturer of wheelchairs. At the time was Everest and Jennings.
Mhm.
I joined Sunrise Medical, one of the premier durable medical equipment manufacturing distributors in this country. So I've done canes, crutches, walkers, wheelchairs, hospital beds, home care beds, all of that type of work. Um, Dental devices, extensive amount of dental devices, both durable and disposable. And then industrial products. So primarily the industrial products I've worked on include PPE, earplugs, earmuffs, industrial full face respirators used in factories, half masks, and of course, earplugs, military earplugs,
Mhm.
N95 masks, all of that. Um, so I love those three categories. I often say I don't do the F's. I don't do food, fashion, pharma, or flying objects. So no aerospace.
Very good. Very good. All right. So if you could go back, is adding expert witness work as a service you provide something you would do again?
Definitely. In fact, if I knew about it earlier in my career, I probably would have looked at what credentials, what study I could do in order to expedite my involvement with it. Again, coming back to this discussion of the intersection of law and product, I just find that fascinating. Always have worked well with typically chief legal counsel in the firms I've worked for. In fact, the last two companies I worked for before going out on my own, chief legal counsel and chief operating officer were my bosses. And so getting that experience was just great. And if I could have done it sooner, I probably would have. But I'm enjoying it quite a bit now.
Yeah, that's great. You've certainly got a wide variety of experience that you can apply to different cases. So that's uh, swings in your favor for sure.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
that's also, like you said, a lot of people just don't know that this is a service that they can offer. And I've found that there are a lot of people that have been doing expert witness work for a number of years that are getting to the point where they're retiring. And it seems like there's same problem in a lot of industries, but there's sort of a big gap or a vacuum that's starting to generate right now that's going to need to be filled. So one of the things that we're hoping to do with this podcast is to introduce people to this type of work and give them some tips and tricks to get into this type of work and to be able to do it well and properly. So
That's great. In fact, I'll share this ultimately when it's done with my LinkedIn followers. I have about 8,000 followers now on LinkedIn, and I think it'd be a great way to promote the work that you're doing, and I appreciate what you're doing.
yeah, absolutely. So the last question, a lot of attorneys, we send this out to our list of attorneys and hopefully others listen to it as well. But how can they find you if they're looking for an expert on the types of things you might be able to help them with?
Sure. Lots of different ways to find me. If you search on LinkedIn for Eric Paul Rose, you will find me. My website is pinnaclepi.com, pinnaclepi.com. You can check out my website. My services includes a whole page on multiple pages actually on expert witness work. And if you just are looking for me online, you can always just Google Eric Paul Rose, product design expert witness, and you'll find me through a number of expert witness registries as well as my own website.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, Eric, thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing with us your experiences on this 3M earplug case and your other insights. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, David. Much appreciated.